Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I have three questions and clarifications for the Deputy Prime Minister. Before I start, can I ask DPM Heng, where did he get the figure of $20 million for a Parliament Budget Office from?
Mr. Singh, I got it from your member who mentioned it. It is in the record.
Can the WP, Mr. Speaker, can I ask that the WP member who made that, who gave that figure, please clarify? Was that figure actually given?
Associate Professor James Lim.
I believe that the information was shared with the ministry in bullet points for my cut, which has not been delivered.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Committee of Supply debates have not begun. That figure was specific to a cut. I believe the MOF officials had asked MP James Lim to deliver points for, and it should not really be part of this debate. But having said that, that was with regard to, I believe, a fiscal office. That cut hasn't been delivered. Let me carry on with my clarifications and questions. The Parliament Budget Office, or Parliamentary Budget Officer, is not an unusual institution in many parliamentary democracies. It's a new, fairly new institution, and really it is to not help the opposition in Parliament, it is to help all MPs. And this is consonant with the separation of powers schema. Now, I was a member of the Estimates Committee some years ago, and I'll never forget, and those members who, those MPs who are members of the Estimates Committee will also remember, a senior civil servant said, "I cannot be smarter than my boss. I cannot be smarter than my boss." Who's her boss? Her boss is the Minister of Finance. And so a Parliament Budget Office or officer is there to provide independent analysis, to confirm the nature of the budget, to confirm that programs are delivering the outcomes that are desired, as was quite eloquently put by the member for Aljunied, Mr. Leon Pereira, who said it's not just about getting an A for effort, it's about scoring an A for outcomes. And to that end, as I acknowledged in my speech, the NS DPM Heng also shared in his roundup speech, the budget is not about a one-year program, it's about a multi-year program. And in my speech, I asked DPM Heng, for which I don't believe a clarification was forthcoming, about the $24 billion being, about the headline $24 billion figure, which is a multi-year initiative. Questions about the accountability of this figure. How are we going to look back at this figure and say that money has been spent prudently? The second point is with regard to the capability transfer program. I believe I had some questions about it, and fundamentally, again, Minister committed it until 2024, I believe, and I had some questions about how many Singaporeans were trained. Minister gave the number less than 970, and my query was whether this was, my query also sought information on how much money was spent on this initiative and whether these outcomes are outcomes that the government is satisfied with. I don't believe that was answered. My third point actually is a carryover from the unity budget. Minister made the point about a remark I had made, elbow room, more fiscal elbow room than any other government. I think that's factually true. More revenues, more expenditure, certainly more expenditure, but certainly more revenues as well for the government to spend and to consider how to lay out its plans. So there's nothing factually inaccurate about that. But I would come to the point of the driver support program, or the various programs that the government has laid out for private hire drivers. Now, in the unity budget, I spoke about another community of individuals, private hire bus drivers. And many of them support the tourism sector. I think in this budget, with the JSS being extended to severely hit sectors like aviation, I'm sure the workers in that industry, the companies in that industry appreciate the support. But this group of private hire bus drivers, there was support rendered in the subsequent budgets from the unity budget. The most important, or not the most important, one of the most important interventions was to subsidize the cost of parking in HDB estates for these private hire bus drivers. And that was extended to March 2021. Can I ask Minister Heng whether this extension would continue for this group of workers because the tourism industry is decimated? Thank you.
Leader.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. I did not mean to go before the Deputy Prime Minister responds, but I just wanted to ask or seek a clarification from the Leader of the Opposition, because this may be helpful for either the Deputy Prime Minister's reply or perhaps for later. When he refers to the Parliamentary Budget Office, and I think it was quite clear in his original speech and just now that he indicated that the purpose of this office is to assess outcomes of government expenditure. Can I just clarify if that is the purpose? Question number one. Question number two, is this the same as the Independent Fiscal Council that the other member of the Workers' Party, Mr. James Lim, has filed a cut on?
The independent, I beg your pardon, the Parliament Budget Office that I had shared in my speech in this debate about actually mirrors the Canadian model, the Canadian Parliament Budget Office. Parliament Budget Office, or under the Parliament of Canada Act, I believe it's called Parliament Budget Officer. So the second answer then is, the second question is answered. No, it is not. It is not the same proposal that has not been delivered by Mr. James Lim.
Leader.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. So there are actually then two proposals. One for a Parliamentary Budget Office and the other for an Independent Fiscal Council. That is correct?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether Leader can phrase it that way, because the Independent Fiscal Council, that cut has not been delivered. So there is terminology. I think IMF refers to all these different agencies within Parliament as fiscal councils, but perhaps we should wait for Member James Lim to deliver his cut. Then the clarification would be obvious.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't really my question. The Leader of the Opposition is, well, also the Leader of the Workers' Party. So I assume he knows what he's talking about, and I assume he knows what his member is going to ask about. So I'm not asking in advance what Associate Professor James Lim is going to say. That, of course, he will do in the Committee of Supply. But I'm just asking, and I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition must know this, is the office that he's asking to be set up the same thing as what his colleague is going to ask for, or are they both asking for two separate things? That's all I want to know.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Leader that it'll be the same thing.
DPM Heng. His response is a bit
Well,
the same.
now that you say it's the same, Mr. Speaker, sir, now that Mr. Pritam Singh said it's the same thing, I'm totally confused, because they are very different entities. But before I answer your specific questions, let me repeat what I said right at the beginning of this debate. I said over the last few days, passionate debate went along a few threads. Some members elevated the debate to help Singaporeans appreciate the changing landscape and the need to change. Some members highlighted the importance of our reserves, the bold and decisive response mounted, and what it achieved. Unfortunately, some argued selectively without acknowledging the broader context, broader impact of COVID-19, and the outcomes of the government's decisive interventions. So Mr. Singh said earlier that, we should set up such an office because it is important to examine outcomes. You had an encounter with a Ministry of Finance official who said that, I'm not smarter than my boss. Your arguments are totally convoluted. One does not lead to the other. And first, if your focus is on outcome, may I ask if Mr. Singh and the Workers' Party members have read the interim report which I have put out in the Ministry of Finance website, widely reported in the papers, on what the measures have achieved. There is a reason why I put out the interim report, even though the full effects have not been done. Because I am conscious that we have used a big part of the last year's budget. We have used the past reserves, and that I have a responsibility to account for those outcomes, and I put those outcomes. So you talk about, assessing outcomes. That is our biggest spending, and does the Workers' Party have any comments on that? Because I sat through the debate, I read your transcripts, but no one mentioned about outcome, no one raised a question about, could this have been done better, could it have been done better? So what is the purpose of setting up an office when with information that is publicly available is there for you to ask?
Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this is essentially a question, as I mentioned in my first intervention, about organs of state. You have the Ministry of Finance, you have political office holders who drive the agenda of that ministry, and you have a parliamentary platform where the Parliament Budget Officer sits, or the proposed Parliament Budget Officer will sit. Two different functions, completely independent of what government is saying about the outcomes, because that's an independent perspective, and that's something for Parliament, who is going to approve the budget. And those who are approving the budget ought to have, I think, access to an independent analysis. And that's what the Parliament Budget Officer will give.
Singh himself admitted that you have different names, different nomenclature. So I don't want to prolong this debate, but we have a Committee of Supplies coming up on the Ministry of Finance, and we can debate that. But let me ask for the Workers' Party to be clear about what is it that you're proposing. And second, I'm asking you a very simple question. Has you or any of your WP member scrutinized that interim report and have questions for us? But instead, in talking about outcome, what you have asked us just now, you raised the issue about, what about the capability transfer program MOM is going to do 2024? This is going to be debated in the ministry at the COS for MOM. And you can ask those detailed questions. Then you ask, what about the private hire car drivers and so on? And what, would that be extended? Now, those are details of the scheme. This budget debate is a serious debate about whether our broad direction is correct. And do you have suggestions on how we can do it better? I'm open to your ideas, but I have to say, unfortunately, so far I've heard none.
Mr. Singh.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that when there's a budget debate, it's again part of the rules of debate. When I bring up a subject matter, that's the subject matter I want to talk about. I'm not sure another member has capacity then to ask me about a matter I have not spoken about. So just as a point of order, I think we should make that clear. I mean, these standing orders exist for a reason, I suppose. Insofar as the Minister's answers on capability transfer program, other issues being dealt with in the COS, I can accept those answers. I think I can ask my questions during the COS.